My last video was a kind of introduction to the thoughts of Jordan Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Toronto, Canada, mainly on his concept of meaning, which is closely linked to the concepts of freedom and responsibility. Today we will have a look at his thoughts on postmodernism. According to Peterson, the collectivist narrative dominant at US and Canadian universities is spreading out into the world, including the corporate world. He defines this narrative as a pastiche of Neo-Marxism and postmodernism, and its fundamental claim is that you are not essentially an individual, but a member of a group, according to your ethnicity, your sex, or any of the other endless number of potential groups that you belong to. The world is a battleground of groups. The individual is eliminated. For a collectivist, there is no such thing as free speech, Peterson says, because when you speak, all you do is to play a power game on behalf of your group. The West is seen as an oppressive, male-dominated patriarchy, and relationships between men and women as oppression of women by men. The academics who defend this view in disciplines like sociology, anthropology, English literature, women's studies, ethnic studies and racial studies undermine Western civilization by using unscientific methods, cult-like behavior, the propagation of safe spaces and left-wing activism, Peterson says. But who is really the oppressor and who is being oppressed, he asks. We are all an amalgam of both. Now let's delve further into these concepts. Postmodernism claims that the world is unbelievably complex, and it's very difficult to understand it, Peterson says. There's an indefinite number of interpretations of a certain book, for example. How do you know which interpretation is to take precedence? How can you justify your particular approach? The rejection of canonical interpretations leads to moral relativism, however, which makes it impossible to orientate in the world, according to Peterson. You need what Peterson calls a grand narrative, something to guide you. The postmodernists' solution to this problem was to ally with the Neo-Marxists. The oppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie turned into sex-based and race-based identity politics. The proletariat was widened into the group of the so-called oppressed, the bourgeoisie into the oppressors. According to this neo-Marxist postmodernism, all forms of masculine authority are nothing but tyrannical power. Ideologies are fragmentary mythologies, Peterson says, and the symbol for tyrannical power, according to the neo-Marxist postmodernists, is the tyrannical father. There is no appreciation for the benevolent father, and the mother is always seen as benevolent, never as tyrannical. In the left as well as in the extreme right, people are accused of the crimes committed by people in their group. The leftists attack their critics like Peterson himself for possessing so-called white privilege, thus identifying these people with a certain racial group and then make them suffer the consequences of that group's hypothetical crimes. Peterson calls these attacks racist, and rightly so. Peterson's students at his home university are unaware of the mass exterminations and crimes done in the name of Stalinism and Maoism. This is not being taught at schools. Egalitarian movements may be started by persons motivated by compassion, but they are very rapidly taken over by people motivated by hatred, which happened in all leftist revolutions in the last 100 years. In the Soviet Union, especially in the 20s, there was the idea that you could remake human beings entirely because they had no essential nature. If nothing exists except power, it gives you the right to exercise your power in the creation of the kind of humanity that you want. It also justifies the postmodern insistence that everything is a linguistic construct. Nothing binds you. There's no history, no biology, culture can be manipulated at will. But postmodernism is wrong, Peterson says. Having an enemy to fight can give a facade of meaning to your life, but it's only a facade and it cannot replace genuine responsibility. It's true that there are an infinite number of possible interpretations, but there is not an infinite number of ways of acting in the world which are actually successful. You have to take care of yourself in a way that does not interfere with the way in which you are taking care of yourself next week or in a year. Thus you can't do what you want at the moment. You're responsible for your future self and for your family now and in the future, as well as for your community. That's a tight set of constraints, Peterson says. People who are possessed by an ideology make everything attributable to a single cause, like power. In their reduction of everything to power games, the postmodernists are driven by resentment towards competence, which is partly rooted in the academics' disdain for the business world, a disdain which is based on envy, since most intelligent people make more money in the private sphere. A person who is unable to tolerate any dominance hierarchy testing was probably raised by older parents who had excess resources and who have no siblings. Such a person was special as a child and protected, thus it does not become robust and resilient. This is further supported by the universities, who set up rules to prevent that people are ever offended by anything. This has spread to the corporate world. There are already corporate policies in the US that are regulating the amount of time that you can look at each other, Peterson says. We sacrifice freedom of speech to the idea that no one is to be oppressed, and we sacrifice it to our complete peril. Freedom of speech is a cardinal right, because speaking freely is a presupposition for thinking. You think when you speak, and people orient themselves in the world by thinking. And acting like a reasonable human being is so complex that it can't be articulated fully in dogmatic legalization. You cannot make a policy of reasonable behavior. Postmodernism and Neo-Marxism are sucking the vitality out of our culture. The solution, according to Peterson, is to focus on the individual and regard the individual as the fundamental category. The view of men as sovereign individuals responsible for their destinies, their families and communities is the cornerstone of the political and economical system in the West. Modern conservatism and classical liberalism both stress the responsibility of the individual. Peterson's claim that moral relativism makes it impossible to orientate in the world is not correct. Moral relativism says that there are no moral truths, just moral perspectives, an idea that originated in Nietzsche. This does not mean that you cannot find meaning in your own life, and it doesn't mean that you cannot accept any set of moral rules to live by. Postmodernism is indeed a problem, but not because of its moral relativism, but because it can be used as a Marxist tool for the formulation of new conspiracy theories about exploitation, the adoption of which leads to kinds of discrimination which didn't exist before, of men and of whites, and ultimately of everyone. The result is a society where freedom is being limited more and more due to unrealistic safety concerns, and where adults are degraded to the status of children who are unable to take care of themselves and make their own decisions. This society is totalitarian, and is a deeply feminine society, in spite of Peterson's identifying the feminine with chaos, since it is based on fear, and since the state replaces the nurturing mother, guarding and controlling its emasculated citizens.